I knew the only way out was to die, or pretend to. I dropped my spoon in the cafeteria and clutched my chest. Code blue, they shouted. As they strapped me to the gurney, I felt the cold silver key taped to my thigh. It was time to finally run. I was supposed to be dead, or at least that's what the $50,000 check in my hand said. My son had paid a corrupt doctor the price of a luxury car to sign a piece of paper declaring me insane, lock me in a basement, and sell the home my husband built with his own hands. But as I stood in the darkened office of the nursing home at 1 a.m., clutching the ledger I had just stolen, I realized he had made a fatal calculation. He thought he had buried a confused old woman. He forgot he was burying a mother who had nothing left to lose. My hands trembled so violently that the paper rattled like a dry leaf in the silence of the darkened office. I was standing in the administrative wing of Oak Ridge Haven, a sprawling elder care facility on the outskirts of Springfield, Massachusetts, at 1:14 in the morning. The only light came from the red glow of the emergency exit sign, casting long, bloody shadows across the filing cabinets I had just pried open. I wasn't supposed to be here. I was supposed to be in room 204, sedated, confused, and compliant. But I had spat the evening pills into my tissue, waited for the night nurse to start her rounds on the east wing, and slipped down the hallway in my socks. I looked down at the document in my hand. It wasn't a medical chart. It was a financial ledger. And there, halfway down the page, was the entry that stopped my heart. Date, September 14th. Payee, Dr. Andrew Newman. Amount, $50,000. Memo, Consulting Services, Capacity Evaluation, S. Gray. $50,000. My son, Stephen Gray, hadn't just manipulated the system. He had bought it. He hadn't just convinced a doctor I was losing my mind. He had paid a corrupt physician the equivalent of a luxury car to sign a piece of paper declaring me incompetent. The reality of it hit me harder than any physical blow. My son, the boy I had nursed through fevers, the man whose college tuition I had paid by refinancing my home, the person I loved more than my own life, had turned my existence into a business transaction. He had purchased my imprisonment. Suddenly, the heavy fire door at the end of the hallway clicked. Click-clack, click-clack, the sound of dress shoes on linoleum, fast and purposeful. I froze. The night staff wore rubber-soled sneakers. This was the sound of a man in a hurry. I scrambled behind the large photocopier, pressing my back against the wall and clutching the stolen ledger to my chest. I held my breath, listening as the footsteps grew louder, echoing in the empty corridor. Mrs. Gray has been exhibiting increased agitation since the hospital visit, a male voice said. My blood ran cold. I knew that voice. It was the voice that used to ask me for bedtime stories. It was Stephen. Dr. Newman agrees, Stephen continued, his tone smooth, practiced, and devoid of any warmth. He feels the transfer to the secure wing should happen immediately. Tonight. A second voice, the night supervisor, a woman named Nurse Ratched in my mind, though her tag said Brenda, hesitated. We don't typically do transfers during the graveyard shift, Mr. Gray. It disrupts the residents. Can it wait until morning? No, Stephen snapped, the mask slipping. She almost escaped today. She made a scene at the hospital. If she talks to the wrong person, if she gets to a phone, this whole thing gets complicated. I want her in the secure unit before the sun comes up. I want her isolated. The secure wing. I knew what that meant. It was the basement unit. Locked doors, barred windows, heavy sedation, no visitors without approval, no phone privileges. It was a hole they threw you in when they wanted you to disappear forever. They weren't just coming to check on me. They were coming to bury me. Is she asleep? Stephen asked. She took her meds at 9. Brenda said, she should be out cold. Good. Let's get it done. They walked past the office door. I saw Stephen's silhouette through the frosted glass, the sharp line of his expensive suit, and the posture of a man who thought he had already won. I waited until their footsteps faded toward the residential wing. Then I moved. I didn't go back to the hallway. That was a trap. I turned to the second door in the office, the one leading to the administrative bathroom. I slipped inside, locked it, and climbed out the narrow window that opened into the delivery alley. The Massachusetts night air hit me like a physical slap. It was October, and the wind coming off the Connecticut River was damp and freezing, and I was wearing nothing but a thin cotton nightgown and a bathrobe. My bare feet hit the cold pavement, sending a shock of pain up my legs, but I didn't stop. I ran. I ducked behind a row of commercial dumpsters just as the automatic floodlights swept across the parking lot. I crouched in the shadows, smelling of rotting food and wet cardboard, shivering so hard my teeth clattered. Across the lot, under the harsh yellow security lights, I saw it. A silver BM7 Series, Steven's car. He was really here, at 1:20 in the morning. He had driven 2 hours from Boston in the middle of the night just to make sure his mother was locked in a cage. I looked at the car, gleaming and perfect, and then I looked down at my own shivering hands clutching the stolen ledger. He thought I was a confused, helpless old woman. He thought I was asleep in room 204. He didn't know I was outside, didn't know I had the receipt, and didn't know that the confusion he had paid $50,000 to manufacture was about to become his worst nightmare. But to understand how I ended up hiding behind a dumpster in my nightgown, running from my own son, you have to understand where this started. You have to understand that 6 months ago, I thought I was the luckiest mother in the world. It started on a Tuesday afternoon in Springfield, in the house on Sycamore Lane that George and I had bought 40 years ago. I was standing by the bay window, watching the autumn leaves dance across the lawn and holding a cup of Earl Grey tea. The house was quiet, settling around me with the familiar creaks and groans of an old Victorian. It had been 5 years since George died, and while the silence was still heavy, I had made peace with it. I had my garden, had my books, had my volunteer work at the library, and I had my independence. The tea was hot, the steam curling against the cool glass. I took a sip, and then without warning, my hand simply let go. The cup slipped from my fingers. It hit the hardwood floor and shattered, the sound like a gunshot in the quiet room. Hot tea splattered across my ankles. Porcelain shards skittered under the armchair. I stared at my hand. It was trembling, a fine, rhythmic tremor I couldn't stop. Just age, I told myself. Just a slip. But before I could bend down to clean it up, a black sedan pulled into my driveway. It wasn't a car I recognized. It was long, dark, and official looking. 3 sharp knocks rattled my front door. I opened it to find an invasion force on my porch. There was a woman in a gray suit, gripping a clipboard like a shield. There were 2 uniformed private security officers standing behind her. And behind them all, refusing to meet my eyes, was Stephen. "Mrs. Gray," the woman said, her voice slicing through the afternoon air, clinical and cold. "My name is Mary Jenkins. I'm a court-appointed social worker. We have received documentation indicating you are no longer capable of caring for yourself." The world tilted sideways. "Stephen?" I whispered. "What is this?" He finally looked at me. But there was no warmth in his gaze. There was no recognition of the woman who had taught him to read, who had paid for his wedding, and who had held him when his father died. There was only cold calculation. He glanced at his watch, the Rolex I had helped him buy when he made partner, and sighed. "It's for your own good, Mom," he said, his tone flat and rehearsed. "You're slipping. The neighbors are worried. I'm worried. You'll be safer at Oak Ridge." "Oak Ridge?" I stepped back, my heart hammering. "That's a nursing home. I'm 68, Stephen. I'm not an invalid. I volunteer 3 days a week, and I just paid my bills yesterday." "You think you paid your bills," the social worker interrupted, consulting her clipboard. "But according to Dr. Newman's evaluation, you are suffering from advanced cognitive decline. You've been missing payments. You've been wandering." "Dr. Newman?" I asked. I once, for a routine physical. And he evaluated you, Stephen said, stepping forward. He said you didn't even know what year it was, Mom. He said you were aggressive. That's a lie, I shouted, the panic finally rising into my throat. I never said that. I got every question right. The security officer stepped onto the porch. Ma'am, we have a court order for emergency transport. We can do this the easy way, or we can use restraints. I looked at Stephen. I looked for the son I loved. Stephen, please, I begged. This is my home. George built those shelves. I planted those roses. You can't take me away. He looked at the roses, then he looked at the house. He wasn't looking at it with nostalgia. He was looking at it like an appraiser. He was counting the square footage and calculating the market value. Pack a bag, Mom, he said coldly. Tessa and I have reservations at 8. I don't have time for a scene. Tessa. I looked past him to the car. The passenger window was rolled down. My daughter-in-law was sitting there, checking her makeup in the visor mirror. She saw me looking. She didn't wave, didn't look sad. She just looked bored. I realized then that this wasn't an intervention. It was a foreclosure. They weren't taking me to a home because I was sick. They were evicting me because they wanted the asset. I'm not going, I said, grabbing the door frame. The guard moved fast. He grabbed my elbow, his grip bruising. It's not a request, Mrs. Gray, he said. They walked me to the car. I tried to twist away, tried to look back at my house, but they shoved me into the back seat of the sedan, and the door locked automatically. As we pulled away, I saw Stephen walk up the steps of my home. He didn't even look back at me. He just took a set of keys out of his pocket, keys I had never given him, and unlocked my front door. He walked into my life, and I was driven away to my prison. It didn't happen all at once. Betrayal is rarely an explosion. More often, it is a slow leak, a drip, drip, drip that rots the foundation until the whole house collapses around you. 6 months before the black sedan pulled into my driveway, the maples along Sycamore Lane were just beginning to turn. I had been a widow for 5 years. People say time heals all wounds, but they don't mention how the silence in a big house deepens with each passing year. It settles in the corners like dust. Still, I managed. I paid my bills on the first of the month. I tended to my prize-winning hydrangeas, and I volunteered at the Springfield Public Library on Tuesdays and Thursdays, helping children discover worlds within pages, just as I once did for Stephen. I was lonely, perhaps, but I was capable. Then came the Wednesday afternoon that changed everything. There was an unexpected knock at my door. I opened it to find Stephen standing there, holding a massive bouquet of stargazers, the same lilies George always brought me on our anniversaries. Surprise, he grinned, his teeth white and perfect beneath his expensive salt and pepper beard. I took the afternoon off to check on my favorite girl. I laughed, delighted. I'm your only girl, I said, ushering him inside. It was rare for Stephen to visit midweek. He was a partner at a private equity firm in Boston, a 2-hour drive away, and his life was a blur of board meetings and client dinners. Usually, I only saw him on holidays, or when his wife Tessa deemed a visit socially necessary. But here he was on a Wednesday, pulling me into a hug that smelled of cedar and ambition. Where's Tessa? I asked, looking behind him. She's in the car taking a call, Stephen said, closing the door. She'll be in a minute. I went to the kitchen to brew a pot of Earl Grey. As I arranged the cookies on a plate, the shortbread I had baked that morning, I watched Stephen through the pass-through window. He wasn't sitting down. He was walking around the living room, but he wasn't looking at the family photos. He was looking at the structure. He tapped the wall by the fireplace, ran his hand along the crown molding, and crouched down to inspect the hardwood floor near the rug. He looked less like a son visiting his mother and more like a contractor estimating a renovation. The front door opened and Tessa breezed in. She didn't knock, didn't say hello. She just walked in with her phone pressed to her ear, wearing oversized sunglasses and carrying a tape measure. No, the backsplash has to be marble, she was saying into the phone. Granite is for suburban dentist offices. I want Italian marble. She hung up and dropped her handbag, a Birkin that cost more than my first car, onto my grandmother's antique side table without a coaster. Hi, Evelyn, she said, pulling off her glasses, her eyes immediately darting around the room. Still have these heavy drapes? It's so dark in here. They keep the heat in, I said, bringing the tea tray out. Hello, Tessa. She didn't sit down either. While Stephen sipped his tea, Tessa walked over to the bay window. She extended the tape measure. Zip. Snap. What are you doing? I asked. Just checking dimensions, she said vaguely. Stephen, this room has great light if we just ripped out these treatments. Stephen cleared his throat. Tessa, sit down. She sighed and perched on the edge of the armrest, looking like she was afraid she might catch something from the upholstery. Mom, Stephen said, leaning forward. We've been worried about you. Worried? I laughed. I'm fine. My knee acts up when it rains, but otherwise, I'm fit as a fiddle. Are you? Stephen's voice dropped to that low, serious register he used when talking about the stock market. You seem tired, and this house, it's a lot for one person. All these stairs, the yard work, it's a burden. I have a gardener for the lawn, I said, and I take the stairs for exercise. We just think, Tessa chimed in, eyeing my china cabinet like she was pricing it for an estate sale, that maybe it's time to simplify, for your safety. Safety. That word again. The Trojan horse they used to smuggle in their control. I'm not selling the house, I said firmly. Stephen held up his hands. No one said selling. We just want to help manage things. Take some of the load off. He reached into his briefcase, sleek black leather, and pulled out a thin folder. I had my legal team draw this up. It's just standard paperwork, a durable power of attorney. It just means that if you're ever in the hospital or unable to handle things, I can pay the bills for you. It's a backup plan. Dad would have wanted you to be protected. He played the dad card. He knew exactly where to twist the knife. Is it really necessary? I asked, eyeing the document. Ideally, we never use it, Stephen smiled, that reassuring, confident smile I had loved since he was a baby. It just sits in a drawer, but it stops the state from freezing your assets if you trip and break a hip. I looked at him, and I saw the little boy who used to bring me dandelions. I didn't see the man who needed liquidity for a failing investment. I trusted him. I signed the paper. And with that ink, I handed him the keys to my life. The gaslighting started 2 weeks later. It was subtle at first. Small things. I would leave my reading glasses on the side table. An hour later, they would be gone. I would search the whole house, feeling a rising panic, only to find them inside the refrigerator, sitting next to the milk. I must have put them there, I would think, my heart hammering. I really am slipping. I would stare at the empty table where I knew I had left them, feeling a cold knot of panic tighten in my chest. Was I losing it? Was my mind finally betraying me, just like they said it would? Then the incidents escalated. One evening, Stephen called me. Mom, Tessa said you called her Amanda on the phone yesterday. Twice. I didn't, I said, confused. I haven't spoken to Tessa in a week. You called her Cell, Stephen said gently. You sounded confused. You were asking about a dog we haven't had in 20 years. Stephen, I don't remember that. I know, he said, his voice dripping with sad sympathy. That's what worries me. You don't remember. I hung up the phone and sat in the dark, terrified. Was I losing it? Was George waiting for me on the other side of a fog I couldn't see through? That fear made me compliant. When Stephen suggested a checkup with a specialist, I agreed. I wanted to know what was wrong with me. He drove me to a medical building in Northampton. It wasn't my usual doctor. Dr. Newman is the best in the state, Stephen assured me. He specializes in age-related decline. Dr. Andrew Newman was younger than I expected, with slick back hair and a watch that matched Stephen's. He didn't greet me with warmth. He greeted me with a clipboard. Stephen tells me we've had some episodes, he said. not looking at me. Wandering, aggression, forgetting names. I haven't been aggressive, I protested. Dr. Newman made a note. Patient exhibits denial and defensiveness. Let's do a simple test, he said. Count backward from 100 by sevens. 93, 86, 79, I started. I was good at math. I had done the bookkeeping for George's hardware store for 30 years. Stop, Dr. Newman interrupted. You skipped 84. No, I didn't. 93 minus 7 is 86. He looked at Stephen. They exchanged a look of sad resignation. It's 86, Mom, Stephen whispered. You said 84. I did not, Dr. Newman wrote again. Confusion, agitation when corrected. The test continued for 20 minutes. Every answer I gave was met with a pause, a sigh, or a correction. By the end, I was sweating. I was second-guessing my own name. I'm afraid it's progressing faster than we thought, Dr. Newman said to Stephen, ignoring me completely. Vascular dementia with paranoid tendencies. She'll need monitoring. Is it safe for her to be alone? Stephen asked. For now, Newman said, but you need to secure her assets. If she starts spending money erratically, well, people in this state are vulnerable to scams. Scams. The irony would have been funny if it wasn't destroying my life. I left that office with a prescription for a sedative I didn't need and a diagnosis that wasn't real. But the final blow, the moment the trap snapped shut, came on a Tuesday in late September. I was in the garden, deadheading the last of the roses and trying to clear my head. The phone rang. It wasn't Stephen. It was a woman named Jennifer from First National Bank. Mrs. Gray, she said, her voice professional but urgent. I'm calling to verify a wire transfer request we received this morning. I didn't request a transfer, I said, wiping dirt from my hands. We have a request to wire $50,000 to an account in the Cook Islands, she said. It was authorized by your son, Stephen Gray, acting as joint account holder. The world stopped spinning. Joint account holder? I whispered. He's not on my account. He was added last Thursday, Jennifer said. We have the paperwork here, and your signature is on it. Thursday. Stephen had come over for lunch. He had brought a stack of papers. Just insurance updates, Mom. Flood zones changed. Sign here, here, and here. I had signed them. I hadn't read the fine print and had signed away my autonomy between bites of a turkey sandwich. Cancel it, I shouted, dropping the trowel. Cancel everything. Freeze the account. I can place a temporary hold, Jennifer said. But you need to come into the branch tomorrow to file a fraud affidavit. I will, I promised. I'll be there at 9 a.m. I hung up and stood in my kitchen, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. $50,000 to Cook Island. He wasn't protecting me. He was robbing me. I didn't wait. I called Stephen. I know what you did, I screamed into the phone. I spoke to the bank. You're trying to steal my money. There was a silence on the line, a long, cold silence. Mom, Stephen said, his voice calm and terrifying. You're confused. We talked about this. You wanted me to move some assets to a secure tax shelter. Liar, I yelled. I want you off my accounts, and I want you out of my life. You're having an episode, Stephen said. I'm coming over. Stay there. He hung up. 30 minutes later, his BMW screeched into my driveway. He didn't come alone. Tessa was with him. They walked into my house without knocking. Stephen looked furious. Tessa looked annoyed, as if I had interrupted her dinner reservations. And that's when I saw it. Tessa was wearing a gray cashmere sweater, and on her wrist, glinting in the foyer light, was a diamond tennis bracelet. My diamond tennis bracelet. The one George had given me for our 25th anniversary. The one I kept in a locked velvet box in my bedroom safe. That's mine, I whispered, pointing at her wrist. Tessa looked down at the bracelet. She didn't look guilty. She looked bored. Oh, this, she said, smoothing her hair. Stephen found it in the trash, Evelyn. You threw it away. You wrapped it in a napkin and put it in the kitchen garbage. I did no such thing. You did, Stephen said, stepping between us. You were decluttering. You said it was shiny junk. You didn't know what it was, Mom. That's how sick you are. I looked at them and looked at the bracelet on her wrist, a piece of my history stolen and worn like a trophy. I realized then that they weren't just stealing my money, they were stealing me. They were rewriting my history to fit their narrative. If I was crazy, then stealing my jewelry was rescuing it. If I was crazy, emptying my bank account was protecting it. Get out, I said. My voice was low and trembling with a rage I didn't know I possessed. Get out of my house, both of you. I'm calling the police. Stephen laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. Go ahead, he said. Call them. Tell them your son is stealing from you. And when they get here, I'll show them Dr. Ranier Newman's report. I'll show them the power of attorney, and I'll tell them you're hallucinating again. He leaned in close, smelling of expensive cologne and rot. Who do you think they'll believe, Mom? The partner at a Boston investment firm? Or the old woman who thinks people are breaking into her house to move her reading glasses? He had won. He had checkmated me before I even knew we were playing. We're leaving, Stephen said, taking Tessa's arm. But this isn't over. I can't let you endanger yourself like this. He looked around the living room, my living room, with a look of ownership. We'll find a place where you can be safe, he said. Then they walked out. I watched them drive away, Tessa checking her reflection in the visor mirror, adjusting my diamonds on her wrist. I locked the door and pushed a chair under the handle, but I knew it wouldn't matter. The locks didn't matter. The chair didn't matter, because the monster had the keys. For 3 days, I lived in a state of siege. After Stephen and Tessa drove away with my diamond bracelet, I couldn't sleep. I sat in the rocking chair by the front window, keeping a vigil over the driveway. I kept the lights off, watching the headlights of passing cars sweep across my ceiling, praying none of them would turn in. I knew they were coming. I just didn't know when. I tried to prepare. I went to the bank the next morning to withdraw cash, thinking I could hire a lawyer. But when I slid my card into the ATM, the screen flashed a message in red letters that burned themselves into my retinas. Account frozen. Contact issuer. I went inside. The teller, a girl named Olivia, whom I had known since she was a trainee, wouldn't look me in the eye. I'm sorry, Mrs. Gray, she whispered, sliding my ID back under the glass. There's a court order on the account. Temporary conservatorship pending a hearing. I can't give you access? But it's my money, I pleaded, my voice rising. Olivia, you know me. I'm not incompetent. I'm sorry, she repeated, her eyes darting to the manager's office. Please don't make a scene, or I have to call security. Security. That was the new word of the week. Everyone wanted to call security on the 68-year-old widow. I walked home. I counted the cash in my wallet, $42. Not enough for a lawyer. Barely enough for a tank of gas. I was trapped. The end came on Tuesday. It was raining, a cold, miserable drizzle that stripped the last of the color from the autumn leaves. I was in the kitchen, trying to drink tea and trying to stop my hands from shaking when the teacup slipped. Smash. And then, the knock. I've told you about the black sedan. I've told you about the social worker, Mary Jenkins, and the uniformed guards. But I haven't told you about the shame. That is the part they don't show in the movies. The shame isn't just about losing your freedom. It's about the audience. As the guards escorted me down the front walk, one gripping each elbow as if I were a violent criminal, I saw the curtains move in the house next door. Virginia Abernathy, my neighbor of 30 years, we had exchanged cookie recipes and watered each other's plants. She was watching. I saw her face pressed against the glass, pale and frightened. Virginia, I called out, desperate. Virginia, call the police. They're taking me. She didn't open the door. She didn't come out to help. She just let the curtain fall back into place and closed the blinds. She didn't want to get involved. She didn't want to catch whatever sickness I had. In her eyes, if the police and a social worker were there, I must have done something wrong. I must have lost my mind. That was the moment my heart actually broke. Not when Stephen betrayed me, but when my community erased me as well. Stephen was standing by the car door. He was holding an umbrella over Tessa, protecting her blowout from the drizzle. He didn't offer one to me. The rain plastered my hair to my forehead. "Get in, Mom," he said, checking his phone. "We're behind schedule." I looked at him. "Where are you taking me?" "Oak Ridge Haven," he said. "It's a specialized care facility. Dr. Newman pulled some strings to get you a bed. There's usually a 6-month waiting list." "I don't need a bed," I said, digging my heels into the wet gravel. "I have a bed. In my house." "It's not your house anymore," Tessa said from the front seat. She didn't even look back. She was checking her lipstick in the visor mirror. "Stephen listed it this morning. We already have a cash offer from a developer." "Listed it?" I looked back at the house on Sycamore Lane, the porch where George used to smoke his pipe, the trellis where the clematis climbed in the summer. It was already gone. In their minds, it was already a teardown. The guard shoved me into the back seat, and the door slammed shut with a finality that echoed in my bones. The drive to Oak Ridge Haven took about 40 minutes. It was a silent, suffocating journey. I sat in the back, shivering in my damp clothes. Stephen drove with the casual competence of a man commuting to work. He listened to a podcast about market trends and didn't look at me in the rearview mirror. We drove out of Springfield, past the suburbs, and into the wooded outskirts where the institutions hide. Oak Ridge Haven looked like a resort from the outside. A sprawling brick building with manicured lawns and white columns. But as we got closer, I saw the details that gave it away. The fences were too high. The windows on the upper floors had restrictors so they could only open 3 inches. There were cameras covering every inch of the parking lot. It wasn't a resort. It was a warehouse for the unwanted. Stephen pulled up to the main entrance. He didn't park. He left the engine running. "I'll get her checked in," he told Tessa. "You stay here. I don't want you to have to smell it." "Smell it?" He opened my door. "Let's go, Mom. Don't make this hard." I stepped out. My legs felt like lead. We walked through the automatic doors. The smell hit me instantly. Stephen was right. It smelled of industrial pine cleaner, boiled cabbage, and underneath it all, the faint, acrid scent of urine and despair. The receptionist didn't look at me. She looked at Stephen. "Mr. Gray?" she asked, smiling flirtatiously at his suit. "We've been expecting you. Dr. Newman sent over the paperwork." "Is the room ready?" Stephen asked. "Room 204, East Wing. It's one of our semi-private suites." "Perfect." A nurse appeared. Her name tag said Nurse Ratched in my mind, but in reality it said Brenda, shift supervisor. She was a large woman with forearms like tree trunks and eyes that had seen everything and felt nothing. "I'll take her from here," Brenda said, reaching for a grip on my arm. "Wait," I said, pulling back. "Stephen, please, don't leave me here. We can talk about the money. You can have the money. Just let me go home." Stephen looked at me. For a second, just a split second, I saw hesitation. I saw the boy I had raised. Then he looked at the exit, where Tessa was waiting in the Mercedes. "You're sick, Mom," he said, his voice flat. "You're confusing things. No one is taking your money. We're paying for your care. Do you know how much this place costs? $5,000 a month, and I'm paying for that. He was paying for my prison with my own stolen fortune." "I have to go," he said. "Be good. Listen to the nurses." He turned around, walked out the automatic doors, got into his car, and drove away. I stood there watching the taillights fade, realizing that I was now entirely alone in the world. "All right, honey," Brenda said, her grip tightening on my bicep. "Let's get you processed. We don't want to fuss." Processing was a violation. They took me to a small room and made me take off my clothes. "Standard procedure," Brenda said, snapping on latex gloves. "We have to check for bed sores, contraband, and injuries." I stood there in my underwear, shivering, while a stranger inspected my body like I was livestock. She checked my hair for lice, checked my arms for track marks, and then they took my purse. We'll keep this in the safe, she said, dumping the contents onto a table. She cataloged everything. One wallet, leather, $42, cash, one set of house keys, and one wedding ring, gold. I'm keeping my ring, I said, covering it with my hand. I never take it off. Policy, Brenda said, bored. No jewelry allowed in the intake wing. Things get stolen or swallowed. She pried my fingers open and slid George's ring off my finger. The band of pale skin underneath felt naked and cold. She dropped it into a plastic bag. Clink. You'll get it back when you're discharged. She lied. We both knew I wasn't going to be discharged. They gave me a uniform. Not a hospital gown, but a matching set of beige sweatpants and a sweatshirt. It was comfortable, shapeless, and utterly stripped of identity. It was the uniform of the inmate. Then they marched me to room 204. It was a small room with 2 beds separated by a thin curtain. The bed by the window was occupied by a lump under the covers, a woman who was snoring softly. This is your bed, Brenda said, pointing to the one near the door. The mattress was thin and covered in plastic that crinkled when I sat down. There was a small nightstand, a laminate wardrobe, and a window that looked out onto the brick wall of the next wing. Dinner is at 5, Brenda said. Lights out at 9. Dr. Newman left orders for your medication protocol. I don't need medication, I said. I'm not sick. Brenda smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. That's what they all say, honey. That's exactly what they all say. She left, locking the door from the outside. I sat on the plastic mattress, looked at the beige walls, and listened to the snoring of the woman next to me. I was Evelyn Gray, a librarian, a gardener, and a mother. And in the span of 4 hours, I had become patient 8940. At 6 p.m., the medication cart rattled down the hall. A younger nurse, a girl named Sandra who popped gum while she worked, came in with a small paper cup. Meds, she chirped. I looked in the cup. There were 3 pills, 1 blue, 1 yellow, and 1 white. What are they? I asked. Seroquel for the agitation, she recited from a chart. Depakote for the mood, and a little Ativan to help you sleep. I'm not taking them. Sandra sighed. She popped a bubble with her gum. Look, Mrs. Gray, she said, leaning against the doorframe. You have 2 choices. You can swallow the pills like a big girl, or I call the orderlies. We strap you down, and I give you a shot in the hip. The shot hurts, and it knocks you out for 12 hours. The pills are easier. I looked at her bored face. I realized she meant it. To her, I was just a task to be completed before her shift ended. Fine, I said. I took the cup. I put the pills in my mouth. Under the tongue, she ordered. Lift up. She checked to make sure I wasn't cheeking them. I swallowed. Good girl, she said. She left. 10 minutes later, the chemical fog rolled in. It wasn't like falling asleep. It was like being buried under sand. My limbs got heavy. My thoughts, which had been racing with plans for lawyers and escape, slowed down to a crawl. The edges of the room blurred. I tried to think about the house on Sycamore Lane, tried to remember the code to my safe, and tried to remember the name of my lawyer. But the thoughts slipped away like water through fingers. Safety, Stephen had said. We just want you to be safe. As the blackness took me, I had one final terrifying thought. He hadn't put me here to keep me safe. He had put me here to keep himself safe. As long as I was medicated, as long as I was confused, he could strip my life down to the studs and sell it for parts. I closed my eyes. Don't forget, I told myself, fighting the drug. Don't forget who you are. Don't forget what he did. Evelyn Gray. Evelyn Gray. Evelyn Gray. The name echoed in the dark until the silence swallowed it whole. Time operates differently in an institution. There are no clocks on the walls. They remove them so you don't count the hours of your own decay. There is only the rhythm of the medication cart. Medications, breakfast, TV, medications, lunch, nap, medications, sleep. For the first 2 weeks, I floated in the chemical fog they manufactured for me. My days were a blur of beige walls and The Price is Right blaring at top volume in the day room. I drooled, shuffled when I walked, forgot the names of my favorite flowers, and became exactly what Stephen had paid $50,000 to create, a confused, pliable ghost. But the human brain is a resilient thing. Even under the weight of heavy sedatives, a spark of survival instinct remained. It happened on a Thursday. They served meatloaf, a gray, lukewarm slab that smelled faintly of wet cardboard. As I stared at it, a memory pierced through the fog. George. I remember George sitting at our kitchen table on Sycamore Lane, laughing as he tried to fix the toaster, remembered the smell of his pipe tobacco, and remembered the way he used to say, "Evie, you're the smartest woman in the room. Don't ever let them tell you otherwise." Smartest woman in the room. I looked around the cafeteria. I saw patients staring at the walls and nurses scrolling on their phones. I wasn't smart right now. I was drugged. I looked at the small paper cup next to my tray. It held the midday dose, Depakote and Seroquel. I made a choice. When the nurse, a kind but overworked woman named Marilyn, turned her back to help a patient who had spilled his milk, I didn't swallow. I slipped the pills under my tongue. It tasted bitter and burned the delicate skin of my mouth. But I held it there. I waited until I was back in room 204. Then I went to the bathroom, spat the dissolving paste into a tissue, and flushed it. The withdrawal started 6 hours later. My hands shook, my head pounded like a drum, and I sweated through my sheets. But as the pain increased, so did the clarity. The fog began to lift, and the edges of the room sharpened. By the next morning, I wasn't patient 8940 anymore. I was Evelyn Gray. And I was furious. I maintained the act. That was the key. If they knew I was lucid, they would switch to injections. So I shuffled. I mumbled and asked the nurses what year it was. But behind the act, I was watching. I learned the shift changes. I learned that Brenda, the night supervisor, took a smoke break at 2 a.m. by the loading dock. I learned that Dr. Newman only came in on Tuesdays and Thursdays to sign paperwork he didn't read. And I waited for Stephen. He finally came on Sunday. He didn't come to visit me. He came to interrogate me. I was sitting in the day room, pretending to watch a game show, when he walked in. He was wearing a new suit, charcoal gray, Italian cut. He looked prosperous, like a man who had recently come into money. "Hi, Mom," he said, pulling up a plastic chair as he placed a cardboard box on the table between us. "Stephen?" I asked, keeping my voice wavery. "Is that you?" "It's me," he said, checking his watch. He didn't ask how I was, didn't ask about the food. He just leaned in close, his eyes intent. "Mom, we were going through Dad's old papers in the attic, and we found some gaps." "Gaps?" "Investment accounts," he whispered. "With Meridian Trust, we found the statements, but we couldn't find the access codes. And the lake property in Michigan, the deed is missing." My heart skipped a beat. The lake property. George's parents had left him 40 acres of waterfront land on Lake Michigan. It was undeveloped, pristine, and worth nearly $500,000. We had kept it for retirement. "Lake property?" I said, letting my jaw go slack. "Oh, you mean Grandpa Henry's cabin? I thought your father sold that years ago to pay for your braces." Stephen's face tightened. "No, Mom, he didn't. We talked about it last Christmas. You said he kept the deed in a safe place." "Did I?" I blinked rapidly. "I don't remember." "Think," he snapped, his patience fraying. "Where did Dad hide things? The safe in the bedroom is empty. The safety deposit box at the bank only had birth certificates. He was desperate. He had liquidated my accounts, sold my jewelry, and listed my house, but he still wanted everything. He wanted to scour the carcass until there was nothing left but bone. I don't know," I whimpered, shrinking back. "My head hurts, Stephen." He sighed, a sound of pure disgust. "Useless," he muttered under his breath. He kicked the cardboard box toward me with his polished shoe. "Here," he said. "I brought you some stuff from the house. Photos, old books, junk. Tessa wanted to throw out." He sneered at the box. "I went through it all. It's just sentimental garbage. No deeds, no account numbers, just trash. But I figured I'd let you rot with your memories. Enjoy your junk, Mom. He stood up. I have to go. Tessa is waiting. Try to remember the deed, Mom. It's important for your care. This place is expensive. He walked out and didn't look back. I waited until he was gone. Then I pulled the box onto my lap. It was filled with junk. Old Reader's Digests, a sweater with a moth hole, a stack of greeting cards. But at the bottom, beneath a tangled ball of yarn, my fingers brushed against leather. I pulled it out. It was a small, worn diary. George's diary from 1954, the year we were married. My breath caught in my throat. Stephen had searched the box, but he had missed it. Because to him, an old diary was sentimental garbage. He only had eyes for money, so he was blind to value. I opened it. I flipped through the pages, seeing George's neat architectural handwriting. Bought lumber for the porch. Evelyn made pot roast. A good day. I turned to the back cover. There, tucked into the pocket of the binding, was a note. It wasn't written in 1954. The ink was fresh, blue ballpoint pen. It was dated 5 years ago, precisely 2 weeks before his heart attack. For Evie, if you're reading this, I'm gone. I didn't trust the banks after '08, and I certainly didn't trust the way Stephen looks at my checkbook. True wealth isn't numbers, honey. It's freedom. The rainy day fund is where we first kissed. You know the spot. The key is in the spine. I ran my finger along the spine of the diary. There was a lump. I used my fingernail to pick at the stitching. The leather gave way. A small, flat silver key slid out into my palm. It was stamped with a number, 617. I closed my hand over it tightly, where we first kissed. I closed my eyes. I was 22. It was summer in Springfield. We were walking in Forest Park, the massive Victorian park in the south end of the city. We stopped on the stone bridge over Porter Lake. The sun was setting. He leaned in. Forest Park, the stone bridge. George had hidden something there, and he had left me the key. But I was locked in a facility 10 miles away, surrounded by fences and cameras. I needed help. I needed an ally on the outside. I needed Diana. Diana Hathaway was my oldest friend. We had volunteered at the library together for 15 years. She was smart, tough, and drove a 1998 Subaru that could go through a brick wall. But Stephen had blocked my phone privileges. My contact list had been wiped. I looked at the nurse's station. Marilyn was on duty. I waited until 8 p.m. The hallway was quiet. Then I walked up to the desk, clutching a photo from the box Stephen had brought. It was a picture of me and Diana at a bake sale. Marilyn? I asked, my voice trembling just enough to be convincing. She looked up. Yes, Mrs. Gray? Can't sleep? It's my sister's birthday, I lied. In the picture. See, Diana? We haven't missed a birthday in 60 years. I feel so terrible that I didn't call her. I let a single tear roll down my cheek. Marilyn's face softened. She looked at the camera in the corner. She looked at her personal cell phone sitting on the desk. Strictly speaking, I'm not allowed, she whispered. Please, I begged. Just 2 minutes. Just to say happy birthday. I won't tell anyone. Marilyn sighed. She picked up her phone and unlocked it. Make it quick, she said, handing it to me. And go into the linen closet so the cameras don't see. I took the phone, ducked into the closet, smelling of fresh sheets, and dialed Diana's number. I knew it by heart. She answered on the second ring. Hello? Diana, I whispered. Don't hang up. It's Evelyn. Evelyn, her voice spiked. Oh my God, I've been calling your house for weeks. Stephen said you had a stroke. He said you were in a coma. I didn't have a stroke, I said, speaking fast. Stephen put me in Oak Ridge Haven. He bribed a doctor to say I have dementia. He's selling the house. That son of a... Listen to me, I cut her off. I don't have much time. I need a lawyer, someone who specializes in elder fraud. Do you still know Patricia Montgomery? Yes, she handled my aunt's estate dispute. She's a shark. Get her, I said. And Diana, I need you to go to Forest Park. The park? Why? Go to the stone bridge over Porter Lake. On the north side, the third stone from the left has a loose mortar joint. George showed me once. There's a lockbox behind it. You need this key. What key? I have it. I need to get it to you. How? I thought fast. I couldn't mail it. Stephen intercepts my mail. I'm going to have a heart attack, I said. What? Tomorrow morning, at breakfast. I'm going to fake chest pains. They'll have to take me to Bay State Medical Center. That's the closest center. You volunteer at the information desk on Tuesdays, right? Yes. Meet me in the ER waiting room at 10 a.m. and bring the lawyer. Evelyn, are you sure? If they catch you faking, if I stay here, I die, I said. Be there. I hung up, deleted the call log, and handed the phone back to Marilyn with a shaky smile. She was so happy, I said. Thank you, Marilyn. The next morning, I put the show on the road. I sat in the cafeteria staring at my oatmeal. I waited until the room was full. Then I dropped my spoon. I grabbed my left arm and gasped, loud and wet. My chest, I screamed. It hurts, I can't breathe. I slumped forward onto the table, knocking my juice onto the floor. Pandemonium. Code blue, someone shouted. Call 911. Sandra, the gum-chewing nurse, ran over. She checked my pulse. My heart was racing, not because of a blockage, but because I had been doing isometric squeezes under the table for 10 minutes to spike my blood pressure. Pulse is elevated, she yelled. She's diaphoretic. Call the ambulance. 20 minutes later, I was strapped to a gurney with sirens wailing and speeding toward Bay State Medical Center. I had the silver key taped to the inside of my thigh. In the emergency room, chaos was my friend. They hooked me up to monitors. They drew blood. The EKG beeped steadily. Mrs. Gray, the ER doctor said, looking confused. Your enzymes are normal. Your EKG is clean. It felt like an elephant, I insisted, right on my chest. We'll keep you for observation, he said. He pulled the curtain shut. I waited until his footsteps faded. Then I sat up and ripped the sensors off my chest. I peeked through the curtain. The nurse station was busy. I slipped out and walked fast, holding my hospital gown closed in the back, heading toward the waiting room. And there she was, Diana, sitting in the corner, holding a large purse. Beside her was a woman in a sharp black suit who looked like she ate investment bankers for breakfast. Patricia Montgomery. I rushed over. Evelyn. Diana hugged me. She felt real and smelled like lavender and freedom. Here, I whispered, reaching under my gown and ripping the tape off my thigh. I pressed the silver key into her hand. Forest Park, Stone Bridge, get the box. We've already filed an emergency petition, Patricia said, her voice low and urgent. But we need proof of the fraud to get an immediate injunction. We need to prove Stephen isn't acting in your best interest. He's not, I said. He paid Dr. Newman $50,000. I saw the ledger. Patricia's eyes widened. You saw a ledger? Where? In the administrative office at Oak Ridge. I can get it. I know where they keep the files. If you can get a copy of that ledger, Patricia said, I can have Stephen arrested by Friday. Mrs. Gray? A voice boomed from the ER entrance. It was the doctor, and behind him were 2 security guards. There she is. I have to go, I whispered to Diana. Get the box. I'll get the ledger. They're going to take you back? Diana said, tears in her eyes. Let them, I said, a cold smile touching my lips. I'm not the prisoner anymore. I'm the spy. I turned around and let the security guards grab me. I let them escort me back to the bed and lecture me about wandering. When the ambulance took me back to Oak Ridge Haven that afternoon, Stephen was waiting in the lobby. He looked furious. A heart attack? He spat. The doctors say there's nothing wrong with you. You're seeking attention, Mom. It's pathetic. Dr. Newman was with him. He looked at me, his eyes cold and suspicious. Mrs. Gray seems to have a history of wandering now, Newman said smoothly. First the house, now the hospital. It's a liability. I agree, Stephen said. He turned to the night supervisor, Brenda. Move her, Stephen said. My blood ran cold. Move me where? I asked. The secure wing, Newman said. Basement level, continuous monitoring, no personal items and no visitation. You can't, I said. I have rights. I backed up a step, my hand sliding into the deep pocket of my gown. Fingers trembling, I found the phone, tapped the red button, and dropped my hand back to my side just as Stephen stepped closer. The plan was to move you tomorrow morning, but you forfeited that option when you ran away from the ER, Stephen said, his tone brokering no argument. I can't trust you to wait until breakfast. It happens tonight. A 1 a.m. transfer ensures you don't disturb the other residents or try to escape again. He leaned in close. You brought this on yourself. Then they walked away. I stood there in my hospital gown. Tonight, 1 a.m. They were going to move me to the hole. They were going to strip me, drug me, and lock me in a room I would never be able to leave. I had 6 hours. I had to get into the administrative office, get the ledger, and I had to escape. I touched the pocket of my gown. The key was gone, safe with Diana, but I had one more weapon left. I knew the code to the nurse's station door. I had watched Marilyn type it in, 1954. The year I got married, the year George started his diary, it was a sign. I went back to room 204, sat on the bed, and waited for the sun to go down. The trap was closing. But they had forgotten one thing. You don't trap a mother. You just corner her. And a cornered mother is the most dangerous thing on earth. The hours between 8 p.m. and 1 a.m. were the longest of my life. I lay in bed in room 204, listening to the roommate I had never spoken to snore in the darkness. I was fully dressed under the covers, wearing the beige sweatpants and sweatshirt they had issued me, plus 2 pairs of socks I had stolen from the laundry cart. I was terrified. My heart was beating a frantic, irregular rhythm against my ribs. I was 68 years old, had arthritis in my left knee, and had never broken a rule in my life, let alone broken out of a secure facility. But then I thought about the diamond bracelet on Tessa's wrist. I thought about Stephen selling my house. Rage is a powerful fuel that burns hotter than fear. I sat in that heat, waiting until at 12:55 a.m., the hallway lights dimmed to the night setting. A low amber glow, I heard the heavy fire door at the end of the hall click shut. That was Brenda, going out to the loading dock for her smoke break. It was time. I slipped out of bed. I didn't put on shoes the rubber soles would squeak on the linoleum. I moved in my socks. I opened the door to room 204 a crack. The hallway was empty. The nurse's station was unmanned. The junior nurse was likely in the break room. I walked fast, sticking to the wall. I reached the door to the administrative wing. It was equipped with a keypad lock. I stared at the numbers. Please let Marilyn be creatures of habit. I typed in 1954. The light turned green. Click. I slipped inside and let the door close softly behind me. The office was dark, lit only by the red glow of the exit sign and the blinking lights of the server tower, and smelled of toner and stale coffee. I went straight to the filing cabinets. I didn't have a key, but I had a flathead screwdriver I had swiped from the maintenance man's cart 2 days ago when he was changing a light bulb in the hallway. I had kept it taped to the underside of my mattress for this exact moment. I jammed the metal tip into the cheap lock mechanism of the top drawer, labeled financials/vendor contracts. I twisted hard, putting all my weight into it. Crunch. The metal gave way, and the lock popped. I pulled the drawer open. My hands were shaking vigorously, but I forced them to be steady. I flipped through the files: landscaping, food service, pharmacy, and there it was, consulting medical. I pulled the file and opened it, and there was the ledger. The document that proved everything. Dr. Andrew Newman, $50,000. I stared at it, the red light of the exit sign making the ink look like blood. I folded it and shoved it deep into the waistband of my sweatpants. Then I heard it. Click-clack, click-clack, footsteps. Men's shoes, coming down the hallway I had just left. Mrs. Gray has been exhibiting increased agitation. Stephen. I scrambled behind the copier. I held my breath, listened to them discuss my transfer to the secure wing, and listened to them plan my burial. When they walked past the frosted glass, heading toward the residential rooms to collect me, I knew my window was closing. I had maybe 3 minutes before they realized room 204 was empty. I bolted for the bathroom door, locked it, and climbed onto the toilet and pushed open the narrow frosted window. It was tight. If I had been the woman I was 10 years ago, softened by cookies and comfort, I wouldn't have fit. But stress had stripped the weight off me. I squeezed through and fell onto the wet pavement of the delivery alley with a heavy thud. Pain shot through my ankle, and I had to bite my lip to keep from screaming. I stood up. The night air was brutal. A wet, freezing wind whipped off the river, cutting right through my thin sweatshirt. The ground was cold and gritty against my stocking feet. I was out, but I wasn't safe. "Hey," a voice shouted from the loading dock. It was Brenda. She had finished her cigarette early. She was standing 20 yards away, staring right at me. "Code Gray," she screamed into her radio. "Resident elopement, North Alley." I ran. I didn't look back. I sprinted toward the back of the parking lot, ignoring the pain in my ankle, ignoring the sharp rocks tearing at my socks. A siren wailed, and a floodlight swept across the asphalt. They were locking down the perimeter. I needed to hide. I couldn't make it to the main road. The security patrol car was already swinging around the corner, its yellow lights flashing against the brick walls. That was when I saw them, the dumpsters. 3 massive green metal containers lined up against the kitchen wall. I didn't hesitate. I scrambled up the side of the middle dumpster and pushed the heavy plastic lid open. The smell hit me, a wave of rotting vegetables, sour milk, and wet garbage. I gagged, but I swung my legs over the rim and dropped inside. I landed on soft, wet bags. Something slimy soaked into my sweatpants instantly. I pulled the lid closed above me, leaving just a tiny crack for air. I buried myself. I dug into the trash bags, covering my legs, covering my body, pulling a bag of coffee grounds over my head. I lay there in the filth, shivering violently. The siren got louder. Tires crunched on gravel right outside the metal wall of my hiding place. "She can't have gone far," a man's voice said. It was the security guard. "Check the perimeter fence." Stephen's voice. He sounded frantic. "She has dementia. She'll wander into traffic." "We're checking, Mr. Gray." A beam of light, a high-powered flashlight, swept over the dumpsters. I saw the light cut through the crack in the lid. I held my breath. I clamped my hand over my mouth to stop the chattering of my teeth. Footsteps approached the dumpster. Thump. Someone banged on the side of the metal container with a baton. "Anyone in there?" the guard shouted. Silence. "She's not in the trash, Frank," Brenda's voice said, sounding out of breath. "She's a lady. She wears pearls. She wouldn't jump in a dumpster." "Check it anyway." The lid was thrown open. The beam of the flashlight swept over the trash. It illuminated the bags, the rotting food, the coffee grounds. I lay perfectly still under the black plastic bag I had pulled over me. A trickle of something cold and smelling of vinegar ran down my neck. "Nothing," the guard said. "Just trash." The lid slammed shut. "Check the woods," Stephen shouted. "She probably headed for the road." Their footsteps faded. The car drove away. I lay in the dark, in the smell, and I cried. Not from fear, from anger. "She's a lady," Brenda had said. "She wouldn't jump in a dumpster." They underestimated me. They thought my dignity was a weakness. They didn't understand that a mother fighting for her life has no pride. She only has survival. I waited for 20 minutes. My hands were numb, and my feet felt like blocks of ice. I pushed the lid open. The parking lot was now quiet, though I could still see flashlights bobbing in the woods near the main road. They were searching the wrong perimeter. I climbed out and fell to the pavement, my legs stiff with cold. I couldn't go to the main road. That's where they were looking. I had to go the other way, toward the service entrance that led to the old industrial park. I limped across the lot, sticking to the shadows of the delivery trucks. I reached the fence line. There was a gap where the delivery drivers cut through to smoke. I squeezed through the chain link, tearing the sleeve of my sweatshirt. I was finally out of the complex. I was now in the dark, wooded buffer zone between Oak Ridge and the rest of Springfield. I started walking. I had to keep moving to keep my blood flowing. I didn't have a phone, didn't have money, but I had the ledger. I walked for a mile, shivering, my feet bleeding. I reached an old gas station on Route 20 that looked like it had been closed since the 90s. The pumps were rusted. But there was a payphone. I rushed to it. I picked up the receiver. No dial tone. The cord had been cut. I sank to my knees on the cracked concrete. No. Then headlights swept across the road. A car was slowing down. I froze. Was it Steven? Was it the police? It was a beat-up 1998 Subaru Outback, maroon, with a bumper sticker that said, "I'd rather be Redding." It was Diana. She had been circling. She knew I couldn't call. She knew I would head away from the main entrance. She knew me better than my own son did. She pulled onto the shoulder. The passenger door flew open. "Evelyn," she screamed. I ran to the car and threw myself into the passenger seat. The heat was blasting. It felt like heaven. "Go," I chattered, my teeth knocking together. "Just go." Diana peeled out onto the road. She looked at me, covered in trash, smelling of vinegar, shivering blue. "Oh my God," she whispered, tears filling her eyes. "Look at you." "I got it," I whispered, reaching into my waistband. I pulled out the folded, crumpled ledger. "I got the proof." Diana drove us straight to Patricia Montgomery's office in downtown Springfield. It was 3 a.m. Patricia was waiting. She was wearing a bathrobe over her suit, looking like a general in a war room. She took one look at me and didn't ask questions. She handed me a blanket and a cup of hot tea. "Did you get it?" she asked. I handed her the ledger. She smoothed it out on her desk under the lamp and read it. She read the entry for $50,000 and looked up, her eyes hard and bright. "This is it," she said. "This is the nail in the coffin. With this, we don't just stop the guardianship, we put them in prison." "What happens now?" I asked, sipping the tea, feeling the warmth return to my fingers. "Now," Patricia said, picking up her phone, "we wake up a judge." "The police are looking for me," I said. "Steven reported me missing. He'll say I'm confused." "Let them look," Patricia said. "By the time the sun comes up, you won't be a missing person anymore. You'll be a protected witness." She dialed a number. "Judge Marshall? I apologize for the hour. This is Patricia Montgomery. I have an emergency petition regarding the Gray case. I have evidence of massive fraud, medical malpractice, and false imprisonment. Yes. I'll meet you in chambers at 7 a.m. She hung up. "You need to shower," she said to me. "And we need to get you some clothes. You can't go to court smelling like a dumpster." Diana took me to the bathroom attached to the office. She helped me peel off the filthy sweatpants and washed the grime from my hair. As I stood under the hot water, watching the dirt swirl down the drain, I thought about Steven. He was probably still out there in the woods with his flashlight, ruining his Italian shoes, looking for a confused old woman. He wouldn't find her. He would never find her there. The woman who walked out of that bathroom wasn't confused. She was clean, she was angry, and she was ready for war. At 8 a.m., the emergency injunction was signed. Judge Marshall, a stern man with no patience for elder abuse, looked at the ledger, looked at the bank records Diana had pulled from the lockbox, and issued an immediate temporary restraining order against Steven Gray. He suspended the power of attorney, ordered the freezing of all assets, and issued a bench warrant for Dr. Andrew Newman for fraud and for falsifying medical records. "What about Steven?" I asked. "The police are serving him with the order now," Patricia said. "He's at your house trying to close the sale with the developer." "Take me there," I said. "Evelyn, you don't have to," Diana said. "You're exhausted." "Take me home," I repeated. "I want to be there when he finds out he lost." We drove to Sycamore Lane. There was a sold sign on the lawn. A moving truck was in the driveway. Men were carrying out my furniture. My sofa, my dining table, George's armchair. Steven was standing on the porch, directing them. Tessa was there, holding a clipboard and looking impatient. We pulled up. Stephen saw Diana's car and saw me get out. I was wearing one of Patricia's spare suits. It was a little big, but I looked like a CEO and not a patient. Stephen froze. He looked at me like he was seeing a ghost. "Mom?" he called out, stepping off the porch. "Where have you been?" "The police are looking everywhere. You're sick." He started walking toward me, putting on his concerned son face. "Get back in the car, Mom. We need to get you back to Oak Ridge." 2 police cruisers pulled up behind us. Lights flashing. Stephen smiled, relieved. "Thank God. Officers. She's right here." She wandered off. The officers didn't look at me. They walked past me and walked straight to Stephen. "Stephen Gray?" the lead officer asked. "Yes," Stephen said, confused. "I'm her son. But I have power of attorney." "Not anymore," the officer said. He handed Stephen a stack of papers. "This is a restraining order issued by Judge Marshall. You are to vacate the premises immediately, and you are under investigation for fraud and elder abuse." Stephen stared at the papers. His face went white. "This is a mistake," he stammered. "My mother has dementia. She doesn't know what she's doing." "I know exactly what I'm doing," I said, stepping forward. My voice was clear and carried across the lawn. The movers stopped. The neighbors, including Virginia Abernathy, came out onto their porches. "I know you bribed Dr. Newman," I said loud enough for the street to hear. "I know you stole $50,000, and I know you tried to sell my house while I was locked in a basement." Tessa gasped. She dropped her clipboard, looked at the police, then at Stephen. She took a step away from him. "Stephen?" she hissed. "You said it was legal." "It is." Stephen shouted, sweat beading on his forehead. "Mom, stop this. You're making a scene." "No," I said. "I'm making a statement." I pointed at the moving truck. "Put it back," I told the movers. They looked at Stephen, then looked at the police officer. The officer nodded at them. "Do what the lady says. It's her house." "Put it back," I yelled. Stephen lunged toward me. "You ungrateful." The officer grabbed him. He spun him around and slammed him against the hood of the BMW. Click, click. "Handcuffs." "Stephen Gray, you are under arrest for assault and violation of a protective order." Tessa tried to back away toward her Mercedes, clutching her wrist. "Ma'am?" the second officer said, blocking her path. "Is that Mrs. Gray's bracelet on your wrist?" Tessa froze. She looked at the diamonds glinting in the sun. "It was a gift," she stammered. "It's listed as stolen property in the police report," the officer said, holding out his hand. "I'm going to need that as evidence." I watched as Tessa, trembling with humiliation, unclasped my mother's bracelet and dropped it into the officer's evidence bag. She got into her car empty-handed, leaving her dignity on the lawn alongside her husband. I stood on my driveway and watched the police car take Stephen away. I looked at my house. It was empty. The garden was trampled. The sold sign was crooked, but it was mine. Diana put her arm around me. "It's over, Evie. You won." I looked at the empty porch where George used to sit. "Not yet," I said. "Winning isn't just surviving. Winning is getting justice." The wheels of justice turn slowly, but when they finally catch traction, they grind exceedingly fine. The trial of Commonwealth of Massachusetts versus Stephen Gray and Dr. Andrew Newman didn't happen overnight. It took 6 months of depositions, motions, and delays. During that time, I lived in my house on Sycamore Lane. It was empty at first. My furniture was still in a storage locker Stephen had rented, but I slept on an air mattress in the living room, and I had never slept better. I was cold, my back hurt, but I was free. I spent those months preparing. I worked with Patricia Montgomery every day. We didn't just want a conviction, we wanted a dismantling. The trial began on a rainy Tuesday in April. The courtroom in Springfield was packed. The local press had picked up the story. The mother who escaped the dumpster. And the gallery was filled with elder rights advocates, curious neighbors, and victims of similar schemes. I sat in the front row, wearing a cream-colored suit I had bought with my restored credit card. Diana sat on my left and Patricia on my right. Stephen sat at the defendant's table. He looked smaller. The Italian suits were gone, replaced by an ill-fitting blazer. He had lost weight. His hair, once perfectly salt and pepper, just looked gray. He wouldn't look at me. Dr. Newman sat at a separate table with his own lawyer. They weren't sitting together. That was the first sign that the rats were turning on each other. The prosecutor, a sharp woman named D.A. Reynolds, laid out the case methodically. She showed the jury the bank records and the consulting agreement ledger I had stolen. Then she played the audio file from my phone, Stephen's voice captured in the lobby that night, threatening to lock me away. But the turning point, the moment the air left the room, came when Dr. Newman took the stand. He had cut a deal. In exchange for a reduced sentence on the fraud charges, he had agreed to testify against Stephen regarding the kidnapping and false imprisonment. Dr. Newman, Reynolds asked, pacing in front of the jury box, "Did you examine Evelyn Gray on September 12th? "I did," Newman said, his voice quiet. "And did you find evidence of dementia?" "No." A gasp went through the gallery. "Then, why did you sign the affidavit declaring her incompetent?" Newman looked at Stephen. For the first time, there was emotion in his eyes, pure hatred. "Because Mr. Gray told me she was a danger to herself," Newman lied, trying to salvage a shred of dignity. "And because he offered to clear my practice's debt. He paid me $50,000 to expedite the paperwork, saying that his mother was difficult and was spending his inheritance." His inheritance. That was the phrase that sealed his fate. The jury looked at Stephen. They didn't see a concerned son. They saw a vulture that couldn't wait for the carcass to cool before it started picking at the bones. Stephen's lawyer attempted to object, trying to portray Newman as a liar, but the damage was already done. The ledger I had pulled from the filing cabinet was irrefutable proof of the transaction. The verdict came back in 4 hours. Guilty, on all counts. Fraud, elder abuse, false imprisonment, conspiracy. When the judge asked Stephen if he had anything to say before sentencing, he finally stood up, turned around, and looked at me. I expected anger. I expected him to scream that I was crazy, but instead, his eyes were wet. "Mom," he whispered, his voice cracking, "I just wanted to make sure you were taken care of. I didn't want you to be alone." It was the final gaslighting. Even at the end, standing on the edge of prison, he tried to make me believe his greed was love. I didn't blink. I didn't cry. I looked him dead in the eye. "I wasn't alone, Stephen," I said, my voice steady in the silent courtroom. "I had my garden, I had my friends, and I had my life. You're the one who was afraid of being alone without my money." The judge slammed the gavel. His sentence: 8 years in state prison. No possibility of parole for 5. Dr. Newman got 4 years and lost his medical license permanently. As the bailiffs led Stephen away, he looked back one last time. He looked like a child who had dropped his ice cream cone and confused that the world hadn't bent to his will. Tessa wasn't there. She had filed for divorce the day the assets were frozen. She was gone, taking her Birkin bag and her ambition to some other city, looking for another host to attach herself to. I walked out of the courthouse into the bright spring sunshine. The reporters shouted questions. "Mrs. Gray, how do you feel?" I stopped and looked at the cameras. "I feel awake," I said, and I walked away. The aftermath wasn't a fairy tale. It was work. Restitution is a messy business. The court ordered Stephen to pay back everything he stole, but much of it was already gone, spent on dinners, vacations, and Tessa's wardrobe. We liquidated his assets, sold his BMW, sold his condo in Boston, and raided his 401k. I got my $50,000 back, got the deed to my house back, but the most satisfying victory wasn't the money. It was the house itself. I hired a contractor, a reputable one this time, to undo the damage. We ripped out the contemporary fixtures Stephen had installed. We repainted the walls from sterile white back to warm cream and sage green. I went to the storage unit and reclaimed my furniture. George's armchair had a scratch on the leg from the movers, but I rubbed it with walnut oil until it vanished. I put the Persian rug back in the living room, and then I went to the garden. The developers had trampled my hydrangeas. The rose bushes were broken, and the earth was compacted by the tires of the moving trucks. It looked like a battlefield. But a garden is a forgiving thing. It wants to grow. It just needs patience. I spent the summer on my knees, digging in the dirt. I pruned the broken branches, aerated the soil, and planted new bulbs. By August, the roses were blooming again. One afternoon, a letter arrived. It had no return address, but the postmark was from the State Correctional Facility in Shirley, Massachusetts. I knew what it was. I sat on my front porch, holding the envelope. The paper felt thin and cheap. I thought about opening it, about reading his apology, and about the words he would use. "I'm sorry. I've changed. Please visit." I thought about the mother I used to be, the mother who forgave everything, the mother who would have driven to Shirley every Sunday to bring him cookies and money for the commissary. But that mother died in the dumpster behind Oak Ridge Haven. I stood up and walked into the kitchen. I didn't have a burn bin, and I didn't have a shredder. I lit the stove burner and held the corner of the envelope to the blue flame. It caught instantly. The fire curled the paper, turning the white to black, consuming the words before I ever read them. I dropped it into the sink and watched it turn to ash. Then I turned on the tap and washed the ash away. I didn't feel guilty. I felt light. That evening, I hosted a dinner party. It wasn't a fancy affair, just lasagna, salad, and a bottle of good red wine. Diana was there. Patricia Montgomery came, bringing her husband. Marilyn, the nurse who had let me make the phone call, was there too. I had hired her as my private health aide for the days when my arthritis flared up. She was paid $35 an hour with benefits. We sat on the back patio, surrounded by the scent of blooming jasmine and the hum of crickets. To Evelyn, Diana said, raising her glass, "The woman who broke out of prison in her socks." Everyone laughed. I smiled, looking around the table. These were my people. Not blood relations, but something stronger. People who had shown up when it mattered. To the getaway car, I corrected, clinking my glass against hers, and to the Subaru that saved my life. We ate, we told stories, and we laughed until our sides hurt. Later, after the guests had gone, I sat alone in the garden. The night air was already cooling, hinting at the autumn to come. It was the same time of year as when the nightmare started. I looked at my hands. They were stained with dark soil from the garden and rough from the work, but the tremors were gone. They were steady. I looked at the stone path where the police had dragged Stephen away. Then I thought about the legacy George had left me. Not the money in the lockbox, though that was nice, but the diary. The reminder that true wealth is freedom. I was 69 years old. I lived alone. My son was in prison. My husband was gone. Society would look at me and see a tragedy. They would see a lonely old woman in a big house. But as I took a sip of wine and watched the moon rise over the maples, I knew the truth. I wasn't lonely. I was sovereign. I owned my house, owned my mind, and owned my future. I stood up and walked to the edge of the porch and looked out at the street. The curtains in the house next door moved. Virginia Abernathy was watching. I didn't look away this time. I waved. Virginia froze. Then, slowly and tentatively, she waved back. I smiled and turned off the porch light. I went inside and locked the door. Not because I was afraid of what was outside, but because I cherished what was inside. I went upstairs, climbed into my own bed, with its soft mattress and crisp sheets that smelled of lavender, not industrial pine cleaner and urine, and for the first time in a year, I closed my eyes without fear. I slept, and I didn't dream of cages. I dreamed of gardens. You've made it to the end. You walked through the fire with Evelyn. But I have to be honest, it breaks my heart when I see people listen to these stories, feel these heavy emotions, and then just walk away. No subscription, no support, just silence. It feels like I'm pouring my soul into a void, working days and nights to bring these voices to life, only to be met with ghost viewers. Please, don't be another ghost. If this story kept you company, don't just take it and leave. You owe it to the story to leave a mark. A subscribe, a super thanks, or even just commenting your city. Tell me where in the world you are listening from. Let me know exactly where my voice is traveling so I know I'm not alone in this. And if you aren't ready to leave yet, don't. There are 2 more real-life journeys right here on your screen. Pick one. Stay with me a little longer. Don't let the silence win. Until next time.